Every American knows the story of Custer's last stand, the legend of the fallen general and his wiped-out 7th Cavalry. But what if everything we've been told is from the wrong side of the battlefield? This is not Custer's story. This is a story he never lived to tell. For the first time, we hear an account not from a soldier, but from the man who was ordered to lead the charge. A witness who saw the chaos unfold, who heard Custer's final desperate threats, and who fought not for glory, but for survival. This is the lost testimony of Red Bear, a Arikara scout riding for the U.S. Army. He was there when the first shot was fired. He saw the panic in Reno's eyes. He alone knew the true, terrifying scale of the Dakota and Cheyenne force waiting in the valley. He followed Custer's last command and lived to tell what really happened on that bloody ridge. This is an Arikara scout's eyewitness account to Custer's last stand, the story the history books left out. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Custer had commanded the charge, directing the scouts to stampede the Dakota horses from their camp. By the time Red Bear arrived at the solitary teepee, the other scouts were already circling the structure, striking its sides with their whips. The scouts had galloped down the dry gulch. They halted at the lodge for almost 30 minutes before Red Bear reached them. "There are plenty of supplies here," one of the men observed. One feather went inside the tent, trying the meat and tasting the broth prepared for a deceased Dakota warrior. Suddenly, Custer and Fred Girard arrived, yelling, "You were supposed to drive straight into the Sioux village?" Having moved ahead of his soldiers, Custer berated the scouts, using both his words and his physical presence as they inspected the teepee. "I told you to advance, not to halt," he barked. "You have defied me. Let the soldiers take the front. Move to the rear." Custer then warned, "If any one of you acts like a coward, I will take your weapons and declare you a woman." A scout retorted, "Tell him if he does that to his own white soldiers who hold back, it will occupy him fully, just as with us." Laughing, the scouts made it clear they were prepared for battle. They moved ahead, but Red Bear saw Custer and his men swing to the right, approximately 50 yards beyond the lone teepee. Along with Girard, the scouts were Goose, Young Hawk, Little Sioux, Bob-tailed Bull, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, Boy Chief, Little Brave, Bloody Knife, Strikes 2, Black Fox, Red Star, and One Feather. They galloped toward the Little Bighorn, approaching the Dakota camp as they crossed the river. After making the crossing, they separated again. With Dakota horses feeding near the trees, 6 scouts turned sharply to the right. Boy Chief and Red Star were followed by Strikes 2, Black Fox, Little Sioux, and One Feather. Meanwhile, Bloody Knife's party advanced toward the outskirts of the camp. Bloody Knife suddenly came back into view in the distance, herding 3 horses. "Someone take these horses back to the hill," he shouted. "I am keeping one for my own use." The heavy dust clouded Red Bear's vision, but he soon identified Bloody Knife. This party was made up of Little Brave, Red Bear, Bob-tailed Bull, Goose, Forked Horn, Young Hawk, Bloody Knife, and 2 Crow Scouts. They assembled again near the border of the Sioux camp and began firing their carbines. Dismounting, they took careful aim, while Dakota warriors, concealed within the bluffs, returned their fire. Everyone was now on foot. The 2 sides traded gunfire across a distance of less than a quarter mile. Near the line of trees, Forked Horn yelled, "Over here!" As they advanced toward the ford that led to the Dakota village, the soldiers at last reached them. Red Bear observed troops establishing a defensive position on the far side of the river to his right, all the while moving toward the left. Confusion was everywhere. No officers or soldiers took any notice of him. The soldiers, still on their horses, stood prepared beside the scouts until Bloody Knife shouted concerning the horses. Red Bear urged his horse forward toward Forked Horn, who was calling out commands. Dismounting, Red Bear saw a Dakota horse, injured in its neck or jaw, running toward where Young Hawk was posted. "I shot an enemy's horse," Young Hawk announced, hitting the creature. All around them, white soldiers were yelling wildly. Soon after, Little Hawk moved up to Red Bear. "Uncle, I shot that bay horse. It belongs to me now," he stated. "Take it. Do you have a lariat?" "You can have it." Red Bear refused. "What is the point? We are fighting for our survival. It will be of no use to me." Having said that, young Hawk turned his horse and rode away. Abruptly, Little Brave appeared from the woods, cautioning that the Dakotas were getting ready to attack. "There are more of them than us," he pressed. "Let me shoot once into their camp before we pull back to the hill." Red Bear held Little Brave's horse steady as he got down to confront the approaching assault. Little Brave urged Red Bear to get back on his horse and withdraw to the tree line before crossing the river. Almost the instant Little Brave got back to him, shots rang out from a hidden position just past the Little Bighorn. Dakota fighters, hidden in the undergrowth, fired from where they lay. The scouts fell back to their starting position. There they witnessed a huge number of Dakota riders charging toward the ford between the ridge and the river, screaming and shooting as they came. They appeared to be all over. With bullets flying thickly, Red Bear dismounted and pulled his horse along until a low branch caught on the saddle horn, forcing them to an abrupt stop. The saddle cinch broke, spilling his extra bullets, but he pulled the horse's head until it staggered forward. Twice he attempted to get back on, only to be thrown off when his canteen got trapped under him. In the end, he managed it and galloped after Little Brave, who had rushed off without ever getting off his horse. As Red Bear emerged from the trees, he lost sight of him in the fog of dust and powder smoke, catching only a glimpse of a vague rider in the distance. Then he saw 10 soldiers running away into the forest, their horses tripping into a deep gully. He heard their cries as the horses struggled. Turning left to escape the ravine, he moved away from the fight, pursuing the dim shape ahead until it turned sharply left. Sure it was not Little Brave, Red Bear rode directly past the turning. His horse stumbled, then fell, throwing him to the earth. As the animal ran toward the river, Red Bear ran after it. The horse finally stopped when a dead branch became caught in its bridle. It dragged him backward across the open ground, which was covered with rose bushes and occasional trees. Red Bear got to the frightened animal, but holding his rifle in his right hand made it hard to manage the struggling horse with just his left. Suddenly, a painted Dakota warrior came riding quickly down the stream toward him on his right side. The warrior's face was marked with yellow on the top and red on the bottom. His eyes and forehead were also marked with yellow. Red Bear shot, and the Dakota fell from his horse. The now riderless animal twisted, reared up, and then ran away. Now only 2 noises dominated the air, the high, sharp whistles of the Dakotas and the steady cracking of carbines. Red Bear watched his own horse plunge into the river. He waded in after it, swimming until he reached the animal. As he came out of the water, he saw the Dakota horse he had shot swimming behind him, its dark bay hide wet and shining, a deer hoof necklace clattering at its neck, and a white blaze on its face. The creature crossed the river upstream, just in front of him. Close by, Little Brave had already made it to the opposite bank, his side soaked with blood from a gash below his right shoulder. His horse, although uninjured, wandered toward the ridge instead of coming back to Red Bear. Hoping to herd the Dakota horse toward Little Brave, Red Bear moved ahead. Then, from the downstream bushes to his left, Bobtail Bull's horse burst into sight, its mane and tail flying, reins and rope swinging wildly. The panicked animal raced past Red Bear, so near he could have touched it. The front of the saddle was smeared with blood. 5 or 6 soldiers came out of the brush behind it, having just crossed the river. Some ran after the Dakota horse Red Bear was on, while Little Brave, still on his horse but moving slowly, signaled for him to take care. Dakota bullets fell like rain from the slopes above. Red Bear understood Little Brave's motion as a request for a new horse. His own was exhausted. Getting off, Red Bear grabbed for a loose rope trailing from either Bobtail Bull's horse or the Dakota one. But the frightened creature pulled him into the thorny bushes, cutting his bare feet on rose thorns, his moccasins having been lost in the river earlier. As Little Brave and the others charged toward the Dakota line, the horse pulled Red Bear upstream along the edge of the ridge. Finally, he got free from the rope and struggled back onto his own horse. Thinking all the soldiers were dead after losing sight of Little Brave, Red Bear pushed on toward the ridge, only to find more troops in a desperate retreat. At the front rode Reno, his eyes wide with fear, a white handkerchief tied around his head, foam speckling his beard. When Reno's men lifted their carbines, thinking Red Bear was a Dakota warrior, he urged his horse forward, yelling, "Scout! Scout!" and struck Reno's chest with the flat of his hand. "The Sioux! The Sioux!" Reno screamed back. Red Bear pointed down the ridge to show where the enemy was. A sergeant named John threw Red Bear some extra bullets as the disorganized soldiers fired recklessly uphill at Dakota fighters. A stray bullet ripped through Red Bear's coat near the armpit. Seeing a wounded Dakota horse rushing toward their lines, he tried to lasso it, but the soldiers shot it down. Although Reno briefly managed to rally his men, the Dakotas soon ended their assault. 7 scouts were still missing, but the survivors, Goose, Red Foolish Bear, Bobtail Bull, Forked Horn, Bloody Knife, and Young Hawk, reformed with the troops. Little Brave showed up again, riding stiffly because of his injuries. As Red Bear got back on his horse, the Dakota scout, White Cloud, came up, reporting that Iroquois scouts had taken Dakota horses but had not come back yet. White Cloud suggested they join them, and together they collected 3 horses, 2 led by Red Bear and 1 by White Cloud. 4 distant riders urged a wary retreat until they realized who they were. They were Crow Scouts, recognizable by the red paint on their white shirts. The Crows shared sobering news. 2 of their group were dead on the ridge, and they intended to retrieve the bodies. After waiting without success, Red Bear and White Cloud returned to Reno's position. Other scouts soon arrived with more men. Strikes the Iron, Red Star, Boy Chief, One Feather, the Soldier, Stabbed, Strikes the Lodge, and Little Sioux. Later, a second group arrived with 40 captured horses, driven by Charging Bull, Red Wolf, and White Eagle. The scouts gathered 10 rods down the slope from the soldiers. Stabbed, circling on his horse, spoke of their difficult choice. "Brothers, why are we waiting? If we are beaten, we must obey Custer's final command." Stabbed repeated to the group what Custer's last instructions had been. "Retreat to Powder River. Our wagons and provisions are waiting there." Pretty Face, who had come from the heavily laden mule train, though Red Bear had not witnessed it, joined them, probably returning with the scouts who had taken the herd. No officers could be seen. The surviving soldiers sat exhausted on their horses, half of them dismounted. Relieved to be back with his fellow scouts, Red Bear grieved for the 7 who were missing. While most scouts remained to hold back the Dakotas, Stabbed formed a separate group, including Bull in the Water, Charging Bull, Red Wolf, White Eagle, Red Star, Pretty Face, One Feather, PTAT, a Dakota scout, and Red Bear to move the captured horse herd to safety. Those who stayed to fight were Strikes the Iron, Stabbed, the Soldier, Boy Chief, Strikes the Lodge, Little Sioux, White Cloud, Sioux, and Dakota scouts, including Bull, ESC, and interpreter Halfbreed. Bear Wading and Metaxa, another Dakota scout, joined their line just as the horse herd began to move. By evening, Red Bear's party had gone 6 miles past the solitary teepee, following their trail from that morning. With Dakota war parties overrunning the camps they left behind, Strikes the Iron sent Bull to tell them to drive the herd faster. After nightfall, Red Wolf and Bull in the Water rode on ahead to scout. 3 gunshots broke the silence of the night. The scouts closed ranks, galloping forward until they entered the Rosebud Valley. The advanced scouts turned back, reporting that Dakota riders were nearing. Switching to fresh horses, the group pushed the herd harder, the clouds of dust revealing their pursuers. Worn out, they finally saw a line of trees ahead. One scout located a muddy waterhole behind a steep bank. They slid down the bank, scooping up water in their hands, while the thirsty horses stamped restlessly nearby. Whole Buffalo, who said he knew the way, guided them onward until midnight. When they got to the Rosebud River, dawn was breaking near what is now the Cheyenne Agency. From a high hill that looked over the Dakota Sundance grounds, the Dakota scouts suggested stopping for the day to study the land. Some slept, others stood guard. At twilight they set off again, arriving by sunrise at the camp where Bloody Knife had once drunk himself into a stupor. Among the discarded provisions, they foraged for hardtack and beef for their morning meal. Crossing the Rosebud, they found that Stabbed's party had been there before them, identified by the tracks from Stab's mule. After following the Rosebud to its end, Red Bear's group came upon the remains of a recent campsite, scattered cooking tins, and the cold ashes of a breakfast fire. Recognizing this as the place where the soldiers had eaten, they scavenged what little they could, tying salvaged hardtack to their saddles before moving on. Ahead, Strike the Iron's party mistakenly thought they were Dakota riders and kicked their horses into a panicked flight, soon disappearing from view. Red Bear's men, advancing carefully along Custer's old trail, set up camp on a wooded ridge near the Tongue River. At daybreak, they crossed the river, passing the grim scene of a soldier's body, his skull smashed by a war club. By noon, they had reached the Powder River encampment. There, they encountered Strike's the Iron's group, a wagon train, and a company of infantry dispatched from Fort Beaufort under the command of an officer known as the Wearer of the White Hat. Through the interpreters, Santee Crowbear and the half-Dakota scout Entra, the scouts relayed the details of the battle to the officer. 2 scouts, Foolish Bear and White Cloud, were selected to carry messages on a waiting steamboat to the mouth of the Elk Yellow Yellowstone River. Supplied with carbines and a pouch for the dispatches, they rafted across the river, while Strikes the Iron and Bull later crossed to carry official reports to Fort Beaufort. White Cloud and Foolish Bear eventually returned to the group, though Red Bear observed bitterly that Little Brave and, in all likelihood, every one of Custer's men had been lost. This first-hand narrative illuminates the turmoil and valor of the 1876 Great Sioux War and the Battle of the Little Bighorn.